Right, I don't know how long this video is going to be, and I'm sorry about the camera quality and stuff, because I don't really do anything like this, so I haven't really got any equipment that's going to help me out. So first off, what I'll do is I'll talk about sort of your basic death metal groove, or I would say is probably one of the most basic, and talk about some of the cymbal work that I use for it. So in starting, obviously the shortcuts for the cymbals are the number 4. So I always start here and use this one here. So if you use this particular crash cymbal, if you play it on its own, it's very quiet. And it pretty much is no good like that. So I always accent it, which is this. This is going to be your best friend when you're writing drums on Guitar Pro, because there's so many things like with snare drum and tom hits and cymbal hits where they're not loud enough, so you need to accent them. Now I always accent at the start of a bar the bass drum as well. You don't have to do this, but sometimes I just help that it cuts through and you can hear that's a much nicer sound. Also, if you're going to ride on the crash cymbal, which often happens, and let's say I'm just going to put them here. Hold on, that's the wrong one. So again, instead of using where that one is, you're going to use the next one up. So crash hit high instead of crash hit medium. The high one is better because you don't actually need to accent it. It is actually loud enough on its own. The only time I would accent this is if I'm going to use it at the start of a bar, or there's a few other variances as to why I would accent this crash. But most often you would want to start with this crash and then have these ones here. So then you're going to go like, and there you go. That's like your basic, I would say, death metal kind of thing going on there. So obviously the next one you can go along is then you got some double bass. Now I also find that the China hits sound a lot better if you accent them as well. And let's say this is quite a common death metal thing where you would have ride cymbals on every 8th note, and then you've got another slightly more basic double bass death metal groove. I mean, this is 250 BPM, so maybe you wouldn't want to be writing everything at that speed. So I think 220, 230 is actually probably my most comfortable speed to play at. Obviously you could switch these ride cymbals out for hi-hats. Now it's really preference whether you want to use the half open hi-hat or the open hi-hat, because they do sound slightly different. Now I often find if you're going to have them tightly grouped, so let's say you were going to do what we just did with the ride cymbal only with the hi-hats, it definitely sounds much better to have the half open hi-hats, and particularly with blast beats as well, but we'll go into blast beats in a bit. It definitely helps to have the half open ones, because it's just it's a slightly drier sound and there's less of a ring to it, as to where if you're going to have them spaced apart, oh, that's too high, then I would say probably the open hi-hats are better. You can mix these up. Often what I'll do is I'll have different ones in different places depending on where I feel like in the song. Again, you don't need to accent the hi-hats or the ride cymbals because I find that they're loud enough on their own. And also notice that I'm using a rim shot for the snare here instead of a standard snare note, which is this here. Now the reason I do that is because if you just put a standard snare beat, and we'll see what happens here, you literally can barely hear that snare, and it's shit. So even if you accented them, which is more work and doesn't sound much better. By the way, the shortcut for accent is like shift and the colon, but it's not actually that much quicker. It's okay, but it's not great. The rim shot, which is shortcut key, is number 2. It just sounds so much better. Now, if I'm going to use blast beats, which obviously would look like this, it's important to note a couple of things that maybe only a drummer's going to know. Now, more often than not, at the start of the bar here, you're not going to put a snare beat straight away. The reason for that is, let's say finishing from this bar, leading on to this one, you had a fill. The chances of you being able to get your hands back in place to play that first snare beat are very slim. So you give your hand a rest of either 1/8 note or 2/8 notes. Mostly I'll go for the 2/8 notes. Obviously these are 16ths, but normally it would go for the 2 that I just leave completely blank, and then pick it up with the standard hammer blast there. Now, obviously we've got the double bass underneath here. You could opt to have the hi-hats like that. They're more comfortable to play like that. But if you want to go a bit more hardcore, you could put hi-hats on every single snare. It's much harder to play, but it's slightly more Cannibal Corpse style. This is the sort of thing you'd play with your hands crossed like that, as to where if you had just the one hi-hat, you're going to have your hand here and just be like that, if you know what I mean. Like that. To write the other type of blast beat, the best thing to do is have all the 16th notes out straight away and just go along like this. Actually, we should have started with the snare drum, but it's okay, it doesn't matter. Now, this is where we don't use the rim shot. I find that if you use the rim shot for the snare here, it sounds a bit like a machine gun, and it's just not that great. I used to do it. So this is your other. It doesn't sound bad, but what we're going to do instead is we're going to use the normal snare sound, but we're going to accent it. So in this case, I really should have removed all. You could just highlight the whole damn bar, but then you've accented your bass drum as well. So I need to go back and delete the bass drums and re-enter them without the accent. Basically, this snare drum on its own sounds like a ghosted note, which is exactly what I use it for most of the time. So now, again, you probably wouldn't want these two here. You want to leave yourself a little bit of space. So we'll start with that crash cymbal again, and then we'll use the ride cymbal instead of the hi-hats to go along here. And accent that, and then you have your basic blast. Obviously, with this, you can be quite inventive with the way you might want to put a ride cymbal on these notes here, or have them spaced like that. These often, this can make the beat really tricky, depending, especially when you're transitioning in and out of the blast beat. But if you had if you were palm muting certain notes and then had other notes unpalm muted with the guitar riff, it really helps to match these up with the ride cymbal. If you want to be super technical, it does sound quite cool sometimes. And there you go, you got something like that. I often find that sometimes when writing music, what it's helpful to do, especially with death metal, because it's quite a pain in the ass to write all this, there's a lot of notes, have a file just for drums where you've got all these beats sort of already relayed, so you can just cut and copy them into your song whenever you want. Obviously, we'll finish now, just coming up to 10 minutes with your. I'm surprised at how much I've been able to talk. I didn't think I would have this much to say. Your basic thrash beat would look like this, and I would use the rim shot again for this, just because again it doesn't. You're not playing it so fast, so it really helps to stand out. Again, I don't put whatever you're riding on, so let's say you're riding on the hi-hat, Oh. So I don't put the beat here because as a drummer, you're not going to play that crash and then put your hand back down really quickly to put a hi-hat here. It's just not something you're going to do. If you really wanted to do it, you could, but the reality is you're not going to do it. And if you start writing drums as if you would play them in real life, you'll find that they sound a lot more realistic. It's the sort of thing that I didn't really pay attention to when I started writing. I used to just put the hi-hat there and go, fuck it. But it actually sounds more realistic to not do that. And then another thing you can do with this, which is pretty cool, if you want to enter another beat, turn this into 16ths, add another beat there, you've got this. Like that. Obviously we know what this is useful for. If you've got a guitar riff, obviously we're just going to go super simple here. And at the start. Now the reason I didn't use a 16th note here for this is because if I use a 16th note, it's going to double the hi-hat as well as the bass drum, and we don't want that. We only want the bass drum. So now you can got that kind of effect. And you could obviously have these beats anywhere and match them up with the bass drum anywhere, and it will sound pretty cool. But bear in mind, you know, the drum, that does add a lot of technicality to the drums. It depending on what you're doing with your hands, can make things pretty difficult. But again, it's up to you. I think that's pretty much it. The only other thing I wanted to touch on in this video today is something that's took me quite a while to realize how to do. If you want to do a cymbal choke, say you've got a standard cymbal here and you wanted to choke it, so hit it and grab it. The best thing to do there is you have your accented cymbal like that, and then you highlight another cymbal. It has to be the exact same cymbal, normally 2/8 notes after it. You don't want it too soon because it's going to sound crap. And then you go up here and use this and make it super, super quiet. And because it plays the same beat directly after it, it cancels out the first beat. So it is playing a beat there, but it's playing it so quiet that it sounds like it doesn't exist. Like that. Obviously, if you didn't play it, if you took that away, this is what you have. It's too quiet. No one's actually choking the cymbal that quiet. Sometimes what you can do is put a dotted note and a 16th note. If you're really anal, like I sometimes do, you've still got a 4/4 bar, but it's just slightly off time. It almost sounds slightly off time, so it's slightly more realistic. But that's, you know, that's me being anal. You don't have to actually do it like that, but it's just an idea. Now with this as well, one thing you can do is, let's say you wanted to have a bass drum underneath, but now you can't have the bass drum there because that beat is too quiet. So turn it into a 16th note. I think I'm doing this right. I'm probably doing this wrong. Yeah, I've done it wrong, but it doesn't matter. And there you have, if you added another, if you turn it into a 16th, obviously there you've got space to have that choked cymbal. Pretty useful. Let me know if this was any help to you, and if there's any questions, yeah, sure, let me know. I don't know how much, I don't know whether I'll be able to fill a whole hour of these kind of videos, and it depends on what more questions you have. But yeah, I don't know a huge amount of theory. Obviously, I know what I need to know when it comes to writing. So when it comes to writing these songs, you know, this is what my drums look like. one thing I will mention is, particularly with this here, the reason we use a China, it's not like you have to use a China, but I always like to use a China, and a lot of drummers do, is because of the positioning of the China. Normally it's right above the ride cymbal, and it just adds so much more punch when you do it like this. You could have the blast beats with the ride cymbal on every beat, or the hi-hat on every beat, but it just adds especially on the end of a bar, you don't have a fill here, you've just got a blast beat, and with those cymbals there, it just really elevates it, and means that it's easier for you to then get back to the next beat wherever you're playing. Obviously in this case it's just another China hit, but if you wanted to end on another cymbal, your hand's already up in the air, so you can then get to that cymbal quicker. It's one of those things, I guess, when I was writing guitar, I used to write riffs where your fingers couldn't get to the next part in enough time. I guess it's the same with drums. The more you learn the actual instrument, the more you know what's possible to play, because I'm sure guitarists have written impossible drum parts and vice versa. Drummers have written impossible guitar parts. I know I certainly have. Another thing I didn't mention. Triplets. Pretty simple, but just in case you didn't know, going back to that basic drum part, you got these, which work in effectively exactly the same way. I don't know though, this might be gratuitous at this point, but I just thought I'd bring it up. Again, have whatever beats you want, cymbal hits on the top, whatever you want. And there you go. You can also have what's called the diarrhea blast with this. It's a blast beat. It's probably my very least favourite to play, and the least favourite to use as well. It's actually some people say it's one of the easier ones to play. For me, it's not. I really don't enjoy playing triplets, particularly at sort of 250. I think 250 is my least favourite speed to play this kind of triplets. But if you did have it, this is what it would sound like. Yeah, it's not my favourite thing at all. But anyway, that's that for now. Let me know how this went.